All right, I'm Dr. Brent Turvey. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Ron Miller. And Ron and I have known each other, I think we've known each other since 1996, 97, around there, right? When John Thornton put us together?
It seems like a lot longer, but...
Yeah, I tend to get that a lot.
You look so much older now than you did then, but...
That's accurate. That's so accurate. I put some miles on myself, if that's what you're saying. I have put some miles on.
Of course, I haven't aged at all, so...
Can I tell you something? You look exactly the same as the day I met you in my mind. Like, you haven't aged a day to me. But in my own mind, I haven't aged a day either, so... there's a...
Well, that helps me continue trying to convince myself then, but anyway.
We're complicit in our own delusions. In our mutual delusion, there's a complicitness. So tell people exactly who it is you are and what's your background so that they get some sense of your role in the criminal justice and forensic science community.
Sure. I started off in college deciding that I wanted to work in the criminal justice field and was intrigued with forensic science and worked at San Diego PD lab when I was at San Diego State, just being a lab rat and helping at crime scene investigations. And then went to Berkeley and sat in under Paul Kirk and my friend John Thornton and got my degree in criminalistics, as they called it back then.
That's right. Now, you glossed over that part, but I want people to understand this is not a small deal. You actually are one of the few people that are still alive that actually studied under the father of modern forensic science, Paul Kirk, at UC Berkeley.
Right. And that bothers me.
It does, try not to... just if you can make it through this interview, we'll be good. We'll be golden. You're fine. You're fine. Paul Kirk, he is the father of modern forensic science in the United States, and his way of thinking and his research shaped the way that forensic scientists practice to this day. And there are very few people left who actually study directly under him, and you're one of them. And that's not something to be ashamed of. So
absolutely not.
No, not at all.
That program, I don't care what from the way that program was taught.
Yes.
Whatever field one went into,
yes,
you benefited by the way they taught you how to think. And
that's a
he
fact.
was the original thinking outside the box kind of guy.
Well, not just that. He was actually, I would argue, he was this continent's actual scientist dedicating himself to forensic science. All the other people who came before him came from more of a criminal justice perspective, came from more of a cops and robbers perspective. Wouldn't you say? Is that fair or no?
Yes. That was the orientation that they came from, because that was the only thing they were ever exposed to.
That's exactly right, which is very limiting and very biasing in a lot of ways. And you know this because of your own background. So after you studied under Paul Kirk, you got your degree in criminalistics and an actual forensic science. Tell me what happened then. What did you do?
Well, I worked for the police department at the university system. We were the fourth largest law enforcement agency in the East Bay. And I did all their crime scene work. We had several homicides a year there, lots of burglaries, usual bread and butter stuff. I was on the bomb squad, and I liked working the street. I liked working with people.
Right.
And I decided that I would try and mold my career into something that would allow me to continue to work with people and at the same time utilize some of the knowledge that I had gained in school. And so I went from UC Berkeley system out to the city of Concord and worked out there for about 12 years. Worked crime scene investigator, worked investigations, working on crimes against persons and property. Worked patrol, of course, just like everybody. And I had the best of all worlds, actually. And
how long did you do that for, the last time out?
The last time?
Yeah.
I was at Concord for a little over 10 years before I went on disability, and they sent me back to grad school. I had an eye precluded me from passing the physical, and so I had to make some changes. So
your eyes, you were having a problem with your vision, basically. A forensic scientist, police officer needs their eyes. If you don't have good eyes, it's a problem, right?
Good eyes, there's a lot of stories that go along with that. But
I'm
anyway,
sure there are.
yeah, I ended up getting a corneal transplant several years later, which took care of the problem. And,
oh, good.
But I worked clinically. I went back to grad school, got a degree in clinical mental health, worked in community mental health, and we moved up to Washington. And I'm a native of the Northwest, so I wanted to get back up here from California.
And what's your master's degree in now? I forgot. You got your bachelor's in criminalistics, but you got your master's in something else.
Actually, I have a master's in public service with an emphasis on law enforcement, and then a master's in clinical mental health. Right.
So let's do it this way then. Let's break it down real simple for dumb people like me. You have how many years in law enforcement, would you say?
About 15.
About 15. And how many years processing crime scenes in California or Washington?
I probably had about 5 years of consistently processing crime scenes, and intermittently, you run into them in working crime scenes in various capacities.
Right. So then the next thing is,
I've done a lot of reconstruction.
Yeah, a lot of reconstruction work. I know that. We've done some together. So the next thing is, how long would you say you've worked in forensic mental health for the mitigation part that you've done?
Close to 20 years.
That's right. So you took your original government service job that was based on your science background and then parlayed that into experience with investigations post-law enforcement, post-government work, and then went back to school and got into forensic behavioral and mental health. That's fair? That's so great. It's such a great track because what it shows, it's a reminder that there are, as you proceed as a professional, there are many iterations of yourself that are possible. And for some people like you and I, we can entertain all. We can entertain the iterations that we want once we start working privately.
It's been a great ride.
Yeah. Hey. Sort of. It's not over yet. Don't. This isn't a eulogy. What do you stop that?
When I retired from doing the private forensics, behavioral forensics stuff.
Yes.
As soon as I got my books cleared, some guys from the sheriff's office said, "Hey, Ron.
Right.
We need help in the cold case unit." So they went through the paperwork and the drudgery of the backgrounds, which I managed to pass. I think everybody. Either they lied or they didn't believe what they told them. And so last fall I got commissioned working a cold case unit doing old homicides for the sheriff's office.
Which sheriff's office do you work for now?
Clark County Sheriff's Office in Clark County, Washington.
In the great state of Washington, right?
Over margaritas.
That's there was the one time. Now in our long relationship, I think I've called you. I can count maybe 5 or 6 times where I have called you and said, "Ron, I have a problem, and I'm not sure if I have a problem, or I'm not sure what to do because I'm young and dumb, and you're old and wise, and please help me out of this hole I've dug myself into." And you're like, "My son, take a knee, take a knee with me. Let's."
Here, hang on a second.
But there is one time in our long history where you have called me for advice. And I like to think my advice was useful. I don't know. But it was more like when you have one of these problems, you got to reach out to your colleagues so that you don't feel like you're going crazy with these issues, right? Because everybody around you acts like it's totally normal. And then you meet somebody who's outside and they're going, "What the hell is going on?" So I appreciate your confidence in me and calling me on that issue. That was a rarefied instance.
And for your students, I think it's really important that if you find yourself questioning something, or if you're saying to yourself, the mere fact that you're asking red flag, and that's the time to consult and document. Document everything,
and the mere fact that you have a question is itself enough of a red flag, is what you're saying, right? It's enough of a red flag to take action.
Yep.
All right, that's very good. So I want to just in terms of victimology, what I see is that most investigators and forensic examiners, most investigators don't see its importance or don't understand its importance until it slaps them around a bit, or somebody has slapped them around with it. And most forensic examiners don't understand why they have to use it. They'll know it's part of their protocols, but they just won't do it. It's like they'll skip the step, whether they are a medical examiner. I mean, so many medical examiners do their final conclusions without any victim history. So many sexual assault nurse examiners do their findings and give medication without any history or without documenting the history whatsoever. Tell me about that a little bit. Your experience and your frustration.
Oh man, how much time do you have? I
take it it's a big problem.
Well, just let me. I think the worst case was I had a death case, and I had a lot of medical history that was very pertinent to the.
Yep, medical history that was very pertinent. Yep.
Was unable to determine cause of death, but still ruled it a homicide. Okay.
Right. So they had. Let me recap here. They had very little information. They had very little background. But they didn't collect or gather the information. There was a lot left out, and they still called it a homicide. Is that what you're saying? I lost you there. Good.
My several medical experts, we found the cause of death, and it was a non-criminal cause of death. It was a natural. It was a result of an endocrine disorder. Okay.
Right.
And I had the original ER reports and the lab reports from the ER, the anatoms, the whole history of this child, who was a child, prior to their dying. They didn't die for like 72 hours, and the medical examiner refused to take those records.
So he made a diagnosis, basically a medical opinion regarding the cause and manner of death, without the records relating to the 72 hours leading up to the death.
Right, and in fact refused to take those records when offered.
Right. What's interesting to me is the little game that people play. They'll play games like, well, it's not a medical... On the one hand, it's not a medical finding. But on the other hand, if you're not a medical doctor, you can't make the finding. So it's like this very interesting game that they play, this word game they play. But worse than that is when you have, like, for example, remember the case that you forwarded me? I think you got your hands on it first. I can't remember if it was you or somebody else. Got your hands on it, and you sent it to me. It was the one out of New Hampshire, involving the woman who worked for the Attorney General's office as the sexual assault nurse examiner, and she had refrained. She had left out. She had made she did a sexual assault examination of a victim, and then made photocopies for the defense and the prosecution. And in the defense copy, she took out the page numbers and left off the victim history page because it included things about her mental illness and her drug use. And she said, well, that's because that's my job. I work for the victim. And I'm like, you're a forensic examiner. You work for truth and justice, and that's not possible when you're extracting pages and manipulating reports for different sides of the legal argument. Do you remember that case or no? Wendy, I think.
I don't think it was me, but that's Brady versus Maryland material.
No kidding. Well, but there was two defendants in the case, and the case got overturned once it was found out. They interviewed her about it. They deposed her about it, and she's like, "Yeah, well, that's just what I felt I had to do." And I'm thinking to myself, "Lady, how are you? If I did that, I would be in jail. They would go after me with pitchforks if I did that." But since she works for the state, the Attorney General likes her. Well, we're just going to let this one slide. So that's a problem. But but it also matters in cases where there are false allegations. And you and I have worked a couple of those cases together over the years, have we not?
Yes.
And the most successful of which is Oregon versus Leonetti. That was a rough case, was it not? It was a rough case. You have a coach who was accused of sexual assault by one of his daughter's teammates, and the police. Every single protocol that's on the books was being violated right in front of the police. You had the state investigators who said, "Yeah, there's nothing here," and they collected all the correct information. They followed their protocols. But then you had a family member, or the father was actually a police detective. The father of the victim was a police detective, and he stepped outside of his own agency, violated protocol, I like how you put it. He Bigfooted this investigation from start to finish, and got this guy arrested based on nothing, with no evidence whatsoever.
I want to just correct that a little bit. The
Sure,
father
please.
was a police officer, and he initially had strong doubts about the.
Yes, yeah, oh, that's right. In fact, he put those doubts on the record. He initially thought she was lying.
And he and his wife talked about it and struggled with it for about a week. But he says, I'm a mandatory reporter. I have to do something about this. And so he went to his sergeant and said, what do I do? And at that point, the sergeant says, well, we need to talk to another investigator here. And that's when it took off, and the train left the station, and the alleged offense occurred in another jurisdiction, and that didn't matter.
No, he kept his hands firmly on the throttle, despite it being not his agency or his case.
There's currently a huge civil suit going on about that.
That's right. We won't. I mean, we don't need to talk about it much further. It's all of our opinions are on the record anyway. But the result was unlike most cases. It went to trial, and midway through the trial. Through the prosecution, was like what, day 3 or something?
No, it was after opening statements.
Right, opening statements, 3 days in, and it was over. They dismissed all the charges.
The prosecutors, after the defense's opening statements, asked for permission to speak with the defense counsel for a few minutes and said, I can't win this case.
Yeah.
And they dismissed it.
And that speaks to me. They should have known that going in. That should have been something they figured out before that somebody got dragged into court. Before charges were levied. That is something that should have been resolved. And it could have been resolved properly if they had attended to their protocols, to their victimology, to all that information they're supposed to collect and gather and assess before they make decisions, correct?
Well, that and read the discovery that we gave them.
One of my favorite things is this is the thing I always say to my students. If you want to be the smartest person in the room, all you have to do is do the reading, because no one else will do it. If you do the reading, you'll put yourself in the top 2% of the people in the room. You know, people are they're not doing the reading, and they're basing their conclusions and their findings based on what their friends say or what their buddy says or something like that, as opposed to doing the work, doing the reading, looking at the evidence and considering all the facts. And that means making sure that all the facts are collected and documented, being unafraid of the facts, being a truth seeker as opposed to going and having an agenda. That's to me, one of the things I've always respected about you the most. And this is, I don't know how you survived in the crucible that you did, but you came out of working in the profession that you did, went from law enforcement to private work while still maintaining your scientific aspect. Talk to us a little bit about that. How did that even happen? How were you able to keep and maintain that scientific aspect?
That was to us, Kirk and Thornton. It was part of the protocol. I mean, you did everything you did was everything that we did in our coursework was always centered around the scientific method, to use the simple version. Thinking critically and challenging not only other people's thinking, but challenging your own thinking, and realizing, it's a lot easier to do this work if you don't have a dog in the fight.
Right.
And, when I worked for the law enforcement side and cases would go to trial and maybe there was an acquittal, or people would, I had few acquittals, but but they would say, well, how can you do that? What if they don't get convicted? How does that affect you? And I said, it doesn't affect me at all, because it's not my job. I'm not the trier of fact here.
Yeah, you're not the jury. You're not the judge in a bench trial, right?
The only thing that affects me is if there's evidence there that I didn't do my job correctly, and I need to correct that. I need to. If I left something out, then I hold myself accountable to that. But I don't hold an opinion as to whether or not somebody got off, or I don't feel badly that they didn't go to jail. I mean, that's the system. It's supposed to, the system, if it works correctly, that judgment piece takes place in another venue.
Well, it takes place with other considerations as well. Your job is to give the scientific evidence to the trier of fact, whether that's a judge or a jury, and then they're going to make a decision with that may or may not agree with it, right?
Yeah, no, it's totally up to the jury. They're the ones that have to live with it. And our job is to present the best evidence available so that they understand what happened. And, they're the ones that have to render a judgment on somebody, and they deserve the best collection of facts available so that they can render that judgment.
And that the job of the scientist, as you're describing it, is to make sure that the trier of fact has the most objective, competent, and complete picture of the facts and evidence so that they can make good decisions. And those decisions include considering the scientific evidence, but they also include other considerations that we don't have any control over, right?
That's absolutely, yeah.
All right. And part of creating that picture is, one, the physical evidence, which is, at the crime scene being collected properly, but then later on being reconstructed by forensic scientists and tested at the crime lab, right? That's the other part.
Right. And I think it's important for people to understand that the process of reconstruction is more than just Lincoln logs and putting it back together.
Right. No, it's not. It's not even that.
Right. The process of reconstruction is not only putting those pieces together like pieces of a puzzle, but also being able to infer or actually deduce that a sequence of events or facts occurred as a result of being able to put that all together. It's all contextual.
And also deciding not just what happened, but is what happened part of the crime? Is what happened associated with the thing that we think resulted in somebody's harm against somebody or someone's death or someone's sexual assault? So it's
right.
not just reconstructing what happened, but when something happened and whether it's related to what's at issue. There's a whole bunch of facets to it that are dependent on crime scene processing, but crime scene processing alone can't resolve. And it certainly can't be resolved inside the crime scene until, it can't be resolved inside the crime scene, but it's dependent on what happens at the crime scene.
Right. And all theories of the case have to be consistent with one another. So if your crime scene is telling you one thing and you have witness evidence telling you something else, they're not consistent with one another, then you need to go back and figure out which one is correct and which one isn't correct, or do we need to re-examine this all and start over and try and figure out where somebody made a left turn when they should have gone straight. And that happens. It
happens a lot. Well, I appreciate your time, Ron. Is there anything else you want to leave us with respect to to the existence of and following protocols for forensic victimology as they relate to investigations or forensic casework?
No, but I think it's always important that the victim, again, this is not blaming the victim, but the victim, there's a piece that fits in. The victim juxtaposes themselves into this event in some manner, and it may be very minimal. A random attack, for instance, where they're just walking down the street. That, there may be nothing absolutely wrong with the victim. They did everything that's normal and expected, but it tells you about the offender.
Right. So even as doing the victimology enough to understand that about the victim tells you something very important. But in order to make that inference reliably, you have to have done your due diligence. You can't just look at it and know. You can't just feel it in your gut. You got to go out and you got to collect the information. You got to follow. And the reason why I like the idea of having protocols and following them is because we tend to think in terms of our experience, and our experience creates shortcuts for us, and we tend to follow those shortcuts. And when we do that, we sometimes subvert justice by not doing our job as fully as we should or could because we think we already know the answer. That's the thing.
Make assumptions, and you can't make assumptions. And when you're talking about victims, the vast majority of victims, when they're relating what happened to them, they're being as truthful as they can be based upon what their recollection is. But there are some victims out there that, because of emotional issues or personality structures, are in their own mind, it takes on a different reality.
Right.
And you have to be able to clue in on that. You have to be able to recognize when that process may be taking place. You just can't believe any of your witnesses at face value. You have to corroborate everything.
A good statement will lead you to reliable evidence that supports it. Even if it's not direct, it can be indirect, but the reality is it's going to lead you somewhere. You don't take the statement and then you're done. You take the statement and then you look at what physical evidence would have to be there to support or refute that statement. And it's that search for documentation and proofs that demonstrates your scientific attitude and demonstrates the reliability of a process, so that when you're under oath later on, you can demonstrate that you don't have a bias. You're just looking for the truth. The problem that I see, the problem that I have, is the political aspect to it, which is that we've taken on this new dimension in forensic casework where there is nearly a requirement to pretend that victims don't lie, or that people who say that witnesses are more accurate than evidence. And that's a feature of certain courtrooms and certain jurists and certain agents of the court that they want you to buy into. And as unpopular as it is, the scientist has an obligation to ignore that noise and just do their job and follow their protocols, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. That's why the protocol exists. It keeps you on the track.
That's exactly right. All right, my friend.
Okay.
I want to leave it there because that's such a great place to leave it. You've got to follow the protocols. They keep you on track. And the best way to know if you're off the track is if you're not following the protocols for some reason, even if you think it's a good reason.
Yeah, no shortcuts.
No shortcuts. No shortcuts.
And if you got a question, if you're still on track or not, talk to somebody that you trust and who will give you an honest, straight, objective answer.
Yeah, do not surround yourself with people who agree with you.
Yeah, don't talk to somebody that that will agree with you because they were your former supervisor or something,
or because they're your friend, or they're your godfather. You're the godfather to your children or something. You want to talk to people that you know are going to be willing to disagree to your face. You don't. It's not a popularity contest, and it's not about making friends, right?
and have no qualms about criticizing your work.
Oh, that's so true. Oh my goodness. But thank you for being so painfully honest.